This is a show with no particular niche, baby. It's always about hanging out. Maybe we'll laugh at some stuff, maybe we'll learn something new, but it's always about hanging out, me and you. Hi, hello, and welcome to That Thing with James. I'm your host, James, and this, as I say in the song, is a podcast about nothing in particular. But I also say, maybe we'll laugh at some stuff, maybe we'll learn something new. Well, today, you might learn something new. I certainly learned something new, or at least something I think I may have read before and then forgot and then relearned again when I was researching today's topic, the business plot. Bum, bum, bum. I am recording this episode on Sunday, January 11th, 2026. This episode will come out the following Friday. Who knows what's going to happen between now and then? My God. Novel times, not so novel times. I don't know what the future holds, but we know what we can take, what lessons we can take from history, okay? And that's what today's about. I've talked about this before. As a matter of fact, I'm not entirely sure that I've not already done an episode about the business plot. I don't remember. Have I done an episode about the business plot or a separate episode about Smedley Butler? Have I done these things? I don't know. But I know for sure, I'd say about 75% sure, I've talked about these things in a series I did many years ago, in which I was talking about things that happened in Europe and things that happened here in the United States around the same time. It started off with the events that led up to World War I. Why World War I specifically? Because I wanted to get to the point of the aftermath of World War I. The way the pieces on the chessboard were set up after World War I ended, then led directly to the events that, led up to World War II. And then the world we live in now, which is still, frankly, the fallout of World War II. Although I would argue that the state of America today is most definitely a result of the way this country was founded. Way, way back, 1776, is still having a direct effect on why things are the way they are right now in the United States of America. In perhaps more close to contemporary times, the Civil War never ended. In my opinion, the way I see things is that the Civil War never really ended, and that, unfortunately, although they claimed defeat, they didn't lose. Unfortunately, as a result of the half-assed execution of not reparations. What was it? What was the thing that came after the Civil War? Reconstruction. The half-assed execution that was frankly abandoned. It was never completed. Reconstruction. Because of the failures of Reconstruction post-Civil War, the South won. Now, I'm not saying that as, the kind of dickhead you'll see riding around in a souped up dually with a Confederate flag on it, rolling around Alabama. Because it's if you've been around for a while, if you're at a certain age, and if you've paid attention to news and culture and stuff, you've probably heard people who wave the Confederate flag around say, "The South won, South won." When I say the South won, I mean it in a different way than probably what those types of people, what the supporters, what the racists mean. I mean this as someone who's not racist, someone who, if you've been watching the show for a while, you know who I am. Not enough was done in Reconstruction. And because of that, the losers, the slave owners, ended up winning in the long run. And we are still living with it right now. It has a direct effect on the state of the state. And by state, I mean the country as a whole, the United States. It has a direct effect on the state of the state today. It never ended, man. So that's kind of where we are. And it had an influence on, fucking like people like Prescott Bush helping fund Hitler. What? Yeah, that happened. And we're going to learn about that and so much more in today's episode. And I've got this inkling that this might end up being a two-parter. I'm going to keep this subject revolving around the business plot of 1933, also known as the Wall Street Push. Yeah, related to the beer hall push. I have an inkling this is going to be a two-parter thing, but I will keep these in the free episodes because if it hopefully broadens the chance to educate some people. But in the bonus episodes, we're gonna have fun. We're gonna dig around in the bonus episodes. In case you didn't know, I do bonus episodes. I'm over 130 bonus episodes, and you can get access to them by becoming a patron at patreon.com/ThatThingWithJames. Once again, that is patreon.com/ThatThingWithJames. Support the show, support an independent artiste like myself, and get a lot of free episodes in return. 30 days access, I should say, of all the bonus episodes. And to those of you who are already patrons, thank you so much. You rock. You can find the link written in the episode description in case when I say the URL, it goes in one ear and out the other. Patreon.com/ThatThingWithJames. Yes. Smedley Butler turned out to be kind of a righteous dude, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I read about him. Let me get some water. I'm feeling my caffeine right now, so sorry if I'm kind of zoom with the dialogue and thoughts. I haven't had breakfast, but I'm on my second cup of coffee right now. Booyah, supercharged. Gonna take a sip of water and I'll be right back. Let's get into it with some preliminary knowledge. First, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I think that's how it's pronounced, Delano. FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt. He, like JFK, was in a unique position where he was independently wealthy already, like fabulously well-to-do, to quote Kurt Vonnegut, fabulously well-to-do. As such, he didn't really need to rely on backers for, political campaign. He already had the money, so he didn't need to rely exclusively on lobbyists. And one of the reasons FDR is famous, and he's also infamous. Okay, let's not forget the Japanese concentration camps. But one of the reasons he's famous historically and beloved historically is because of the New Deal. Here's a little summary in case you didn't know or forgot a little bit. The New Deal was a 1933 to 1938 series of economic, social, and political reforms in response to the Great Depression in the United States. This was implemented under President Franklin D. Roosevelt. I also want to mark that the New Deal was a compromise, and it only happened because it was a push. It was a reform, not a revolution. It was just a simple reform, a compromise, because there was a lot of push from American socialists and communists and labor unions. Lots and lots and lots of push. And FDR and friends were wise enough to recognize that if the working class didn't get a little bit of a treat, things were going to get real ugly, real fast. Something contemporary politicians in my lifetime, neoliberal politics, which we discussed in a previous episode. Yes, Republicans are also neoliberals. They don't quite accept. I'm sure they understand it. They just reject it and say, up yours. Let's keep reading. FDR introduced the phrase when accepting the Democratic Party presidential nomination in 1932 U.S. presidential election, winning in a landslide over incumbent Herbert Hoover, whose administration was widely viewed as ineffective. Roosevelt attributed the Depression to inherent market instability and inadequate aggregate demand, following the Keynesian economic model. I've talked a little bit about Keynesian economics over the years on this podcast, but I won't get into it. But I'll give this short summary. Keynesian economics tries to patch capitalism, but it is unable to resolve the inherent contradictions of capital. So it's a patch. It's not a cure. It's not a preventative measure. Okay. You could say social democracies, which is not to be confused with socialism, but, social program forward democracies like those we see in Europe follow the Keynesian model pretty much. Yada, 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 FDR, and argued that stabilizing and rationalizing the economy required massive government intervention. But that's communism, is the propaganda you and I have been fed since late 1800s, early 1900s, since the first Red Scare. During Roosevelt's first 100 days in office in 1933 until 1935, FDR introduced what historians refer to as the first New Deal, because there was a second New Deal that was supposed to follow, but of course, that got thwarted. First New Deal focused on the quote-unquote 3 R's, that is, relief for the unemployed and for the poor, recovery for the economy back to normal levels, and reforms of the financial system to prevent a repeat depression. Roosevelt signed the Emergency Banking Act, which authorized the Federal Reserve to insure deposits to restore confidence, and the 1933 Banking Act made this permanent with the Federal Deposit Insurance Program. If you have a bank, you've probably seen the letters FDIC. That's what that means, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Other laws created the National Recovery Administration, the NRA, not to be confused with National Rifle Association, which allowed the National Recovery Administration, which allowed industries to create, quote, codes of fair competition, unquote. The Securities and Exchange Commission, which has been gutted. Basically, every single one of these things has been gutted over the span of my lifetime. I'm 38 years old, and all of these things have been gutted. I think I was born during like the last year or last months of Reagan's final term. Let's see here. The SEC, which protected investors from abusive stock market practices, and the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, AAA, which raised rural incomes by controlling production. Public works were undertaken in order to find jobs for the unemployed. 25% of the workforce when Roosevelt took office was unemployed. And also, speaking of the Public Works Administration, or whatever it's called, the town I grew up in has a lot of buildings with the stamp, like Public Works stamp on it. These were people who had no jobs before and who were starving. They got work finally, and they built the sidewalks, they built the armory, they built the very deep fucking trenches instead of gutters, I guess, to deal with the water runoff. And your town may have public works products as well, in the sidewalks and everything. He helped establish the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, which enlisted young men for manual labor on government land, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, which promoted electricity generation and other forms of economic development in the drainage basin of the Tennessee River. Here we go. Although the first New Deal helped many find work and restored confidence in the financial system, by 1935, stock prices were still below pre-Depression levels and unemployment still exceeded 20%. From 1935 to 1938, the second New Deal introduced further legislation and additional agencies which focused on job creation and improving the conditions of the elderly, workers, and poor. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, supervised the construction of bridges, libraries, parks, and other facilities while also investing in the arts. The National Labor Relations Act guaranteed employees the right to organize trade unions. The Social Security Act introduced pensions for senior citizens and benefited for the disabled, mothers and dependent children, and the unemployed. And the Fair Labor Standards Act prohibited quote-unquote oppressive child labor and enshrined the 40-hour work week and the national minimum wage. All of these things were made possible not because of FDR, not because of anyone in office, but because of working class people fighting for this shit. They got beat for decades for this shit, okay? These things were the final outcome of something like the Haymarket Massacre that happened decades prior, okay? Let's see. Yada, 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 yada. So there we go. And there was another New Deal, this said that was the second New Deal. There was another thing that's regarded as like the second New Deal, which was a lot more, let's say, aggressive in securing economic rights for working class people, but that didn't go through ultimately. So now we know about a refresher of the New Deal. Let's talk about the people who, well, tried to establish a Nazi party in America to stop that from happening. After I take a sip of coffee. Just a second. Oh yes, this is definitely going to be a two-part topic. Let's jump into the business plot, also called the Wall Street Push. PUTSCH. Similar name to the Beer Hall Push, which was the first and failed coup d'etat that happened under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. Business plot, also called the Wall Street Push, also called the White House Push, was a political conspiracy in 1933 in the United States to overthrow the government of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and install Smedley Butler as dictator. Butler, a retired Marine Corps general, testified under oath that wealthy businessmen were plotting to create a fascist veterans organization with him as its leader and to use it in a coup d'etat to overthrow Roosevelt. In 1934, Butler testified under oath before the United States House of Representatives Special Committee on Un-American Activities, also known as the McCormick-Dickstein Committee, on these revelations. Of course, although no one was prosecuted, of fucking course. The Congressional Committee final report said, quote, "There is no question that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution when and if the financial backers deemed it expedient," unquote. Early in the committee's gathering of testimony, most major news media dismissed the plot, with a New York Times editorial characterizing it as a quote-unquote gigantic hoax. Does any of this sound familiar to you? In present time, over the past 15 years, does any of this sound familiar to you at all? Mainstream media calling a plot a hoax, or massive public figures calling a fascist coup plot a hoax. Does this sound familiar to you? Let's keep reading. When the committee's final report was released, the Times said the committee, quote, purported to report that a 2-month investigation had convinced it that General Butler's story of a fascist march on Washington was alarmingly true, unquote, and, quote, also alleged that definite proof had been found that the much publicized fascist march on Washington, which was to have been led by Major General Smedley D. Butler, retired, according to testimony at a hearing, was actually contemplated, unquote. The individuals involved all denied the existence of a plot, of course. While historians have questioned whether a coup was actually close to execution, most agree that some sort of subversive plan was contemplated and discussed. Interesting stuff. Now, why would Smedley Butler, Major General, retired, be tapped, maybe not directly asked, but they just assumed he would be willing to lead a fascist coup? And then who is this man who then, once he learned about this, flipped on these people? And also, who were these people? We are going to learn a little bit now about Smedley Butler, but we're going to learn more about the people behind it, the financial backers, the schemers, in the next episode. But for now, let's read about Butler. Okay. Oh my God, what a darling middle name. Smedley Darlington Butler, born July 30th, 1881, passed away June 21st, 1940, was an American Major General in the United States Marine Corps. He was a writer, an anti-war activist, and whistleblower. During his 34-year military career, he fought in the Philippine-American War, the Boxer Rebellion, the Mexican Revolution, World War I, and the Banana Wars. All really shitty stuff that America engaged in. He fought in these things. At the time of his death, Butler was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. By the end of his career, Butler had received 16 medals, including 5 for heroism. He is the only Marine to be awarded the Marine Corps Brevet Medal, or is it Brevet? B-R-E-V-E-T. I'm sure in America it's Brevet. It sounds French to me. Brevet Medal, as well as 2 Medals of Honor, all for separate actions. In 1933, Butler became involved in a controversy known as the Business Plot, when he told the United States Congressional Committee, or a U.S. Congressional Committee, that a group of wealthy American industrialists, or you could say corporate, in contemporary parlance, you could say tech billionaires, etc., oil tycoons and tech billionaires, all planning a coup d'etat to overthrow President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Butler also claimed that the plotters of the alleged coup intended on using Butler at the head of a group of veterans to place the federal government under arrest. Wow. I'm recording this not long after the 5-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. That sure seemed like a push, trying to, get Congress people arrested or flat out kill them. Yeah. I remember when this happened. I watched that shit live. The individuals in, Butler's history here, the individuals alleged to be involved in the coup all denied the existence of such a plot, and the media ridiculed Butler's allegations. Why? Why would major media outlets fall in line and say, oh, this is bullshit? Why would the Citizen Kanes of America deny these things? But a final report following an investigation by a special House of Representatives committee confirmed at least some of his testimony. After retiring from the Marine Corps, Butler became an outspoken critic of American foreign policy and military interventions, which he saw being driven primarily by U.S. business interests. In 1935, Butler wrote a book entitled War is a Racket, in which he argued that imperialist motivations had been the cause behind several American interventions. Didn't we just recently have another American intervention? What was it? Venezuela? Maybe something like that? Well, let's keep reading. Many of which Butler personally participated in. Butler became an anti-war advocate, speaking at meetings organized by veterans, pacifists, and church groups until his death in 1940. So I want to focus on that stuff real quick. Let me find it. Give me just a second. Okay, we're not going to go into nitty-gritty detail, so we're just going to skip around on some of these details. Senate campaign. In March 1932, Butler announced his candidacy for the upcoming U.S. Senate election in Pennsylvania. He ran in the Republican primary in Pennsylvania. By the way, Republicans, these things were way different back then. A lot has changed since the 1930s. A lot has changed since the Civil War. Okay, so keep that in mind. The Republican Party he was in doesn't exist anymore. The Democratic Party FDR was in doesn't exist anymore. Okay, keep this in mind when I read this stuff. Please, for the love of God, employ a little critical thinking. All right. In March 19th, if you're watching or listening to this show, I don't really need to tell you that. You're smart enough to continue listening. So anyway, he ran in the Republican primary in Pennsylvania as a proponent of prohibition. Okay, weird. Butler allied with Pennsylvania Governor Gifford Pinchot, but was defeated in April 26, 1932, yada, yada, yada. Butler voted for Norman Thomas of the Socialist Party for president in 1936. Shit, he voted for a socialist over FDR. What happened between 32 and 36? Skipping ahead to anti-war lectures. After his retirement and during his later years, Butler became widely known for his outspoken lectures against war profiteering, U.S. military adventurism, and what he viewed as a nascent fascism in the United States. In December 1933, Butler toured the country with James E. Van Zandt to recruit members of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, or for the VFW. He described their effort as, quote, trying to educate the soldiers out of the sucker class, unquote. Ooh, the sucker class. I like that. In his speeches, he denounced the Economy Act of 1933. He called on veterans to, wait, what is the Economy Act? Was that one of FDR's things? Economy Act, March 20th, 1933, is an act of Congress that cut the salaries of federal workers and reduced benefit payments to veterans. Moves intended to reduce the federal deficit. Okay, now we know. Now I know at least. Denounced that act, and he called on veterans to organize politically to win their benefits and condemn the FDR administration for its ties to big business. Now, what did I say before? The New Deal was not the brain baby of FDR. That was a compromise, okay? Let's keep reading. The VFW reprinted one of his speeches with the title, quote unquote, "You Got to Get Mad," in its magazine Foreign Service. He said, quote, "I believe in taking Wall Street by the throat and shaking it up," unquote. He believed the rival veterans group of the American Legion was controlled by banking interests. On December 8th, 1933, he said, quote, "I have never known one leader of the American Legion who had never sold them out, and I mean it," unquote. In addition To his speeches to pacifist groups, he served from 1935 to 1937 as a spokesman for the American League Against War and Fascism. In 1935, he wrote the exposé War is a Racket, a trenchant condemnation of the profit motive behind warfare. His views on the subject are summarized in the following passage from the November 1935 issue of the socialist magazine Common Sense. Quote, I spent 33 years and 4 months active in active military service, and during that period, I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico and especially Tampico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers in 1902 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China, in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. Unquote. And with that, we're going to close out this episode. Oh yeah, there's going to be a part 2. Thanks for tuning in. If you want a little palate cleanser, I'm going to get into some fun stuff. Hopefully, if I can find it on Reddit. In the bonus episode, if you're not already, become a patron at patreon.com/ThatThingWithJames. Thanks for tuning in, and I really hope to catch you next time. Bye.